Hello, my name's Josh Oberlander. I'd like to thank you for the chance to share some more of my work, and I'm excited to share a couple more projects that I've loved working on. First, we begin with Scarecrow, which was a 90-minute dance piece choreographed by Mark Bankin at the Tank. When we first met, the piece had no title, no narrative, just an image that Mark couldn't shake from a symbolist Marina Carr play, Woman and Scarecrow, wherein a woman on her deathbed talks to a skeleton emerging from her closet. Around the same time, I knew he was processing the death of his grandmother. Without using the text directly, he began building a work around the idea of mortality, what he called a kind of deathbed hallucination, eventually set to Strauss's Four Last Songs. At that first meeting, he asked me what I saw without reading the play in my head. I said, a bed in the middle of a wheat field. That image of the wheat field became the foundation of the design. Over a long rehearsal process, I watched as a series of images emerged, moments between death and dying, of a group of women enacting violent hallucinations, between sleep and waking on one another, but always coming back to life, always going about their business, like hanging up the laundry. The central idea of the piece became doubling. The woman and the scarecrow function as doppelgangers, and that logic extends outward. Wheat is double with decaying flowers, interiors with exteriors, movement phrases repeated but increasingly distorted. The stage becomes a series of living still lifes, memento mori refusing to stay still. Mark many times said the wheat field was the anchor for him, and it became important to really feel it on stage, its hardness and fragility. I asked repeatedly who these women were and what place they're in, but ultimately the dreamlike images that we traded back and forth, images of the Dust Bowl, of Golden Age Dutch still lives, of Andrew Wyeth paintings, became the text and the world. We investigated the work of Gregory Crewdson, where the domestic world and the natural invade one another. Materially, I made a couple samples, but ultimately built the wheat field from untrimmed bamboo fencing, adding in actual dried wheat and grass, creating bouquets of foliage that collectively suggested a landscape, but that also had to shift to create different tableaus and ultimately be stored away after the show. The design operates across two registers. One is an inky black void where a woman sits on a rocking chair surrounded by this golden field, isolated and suspended in time. The other is a more naturalistic interior room. These worlds echo each other, doubling and collapsing into one another over the course of the piece. The brilliant work of lighting designer Cheyenne Sykes and Lola Basileri shift the world from a hot summer day to a strange blue night, from a naturalistic scene to a strange Strauss-filled hallucination. So shaped by its process, Scarecrow as a show still feels to me somewhat inexplicable, like peering through a dirty window, seeing a ritual that you quite don't understand, something intimate, cyclical, terrifying, and just out of the reach of understanding. The Shadow of a Gunman was the first play accepted by the Abbey Theatre from a very young Sean O'Casey. Working with director Ian Belknap, we were drawn to how rough and searching the play feels. It's messy, almost conventional of other plays of its time, and trying to find its voice. But already, it was full of the political energy and nihilistic humor that would come to define O'Casey's later work. And the more we read it, the more we realized the story, though, about the Irish Civil War in the 20s was a portrait of a society shell shocked by an atmosphere of violence. Anywhere could erupt into danger, anyone could be armed, and the only people guaranteed to be harmed or killed were, no matter your affiliation, civilians caught in the crossfire trying to go about their everyday lives. We felt that this play might resonate with an American audience living through their own era of partisan political violence. The play is traditionally set in a single room in a Dublin tenement shared by two men, one a self-styled poet named Donal and another a scavenger named Seamus. When the poet is mistaken to be an IRA gunman, the entire building begins to project their hopes and fears onto him. He plays along to impress Minnie, a girl who lives on his floor, until that fiction turns deadly during a night raid by the English that plunges the second act into chaos. I was interested in expanding the visual world beyond that single room to include the surrounding tenants, to show the entire floor as a collective organism under pressure, a pressure cooker waiting to erupt. I was inspired by artists such as Gordon Matta Clark, who tore existing structures open, showing how their lives mark the architecture around them. I looked at images of the Irish Civil War in the 1980s. The ground plan is modeled off ground plans of real Dublin tenements, former Georgian mansions built by the English but then subdivided over time. Instead of representing age through scenic painting, I wanted the audience to feel the age and weight of the space. To do that, I looked through many options, but ultimately I sourced reclaimed plywood from a decommissioned 1970s steel mill in Pennsylvania, stained and marked by decade of use. Each room is sparse but specific. Minnie's room, for example, contains a single lush landscape image, an idealized vision of Ireland that reflects her political longing for freedom from occupation. In contrast, her Protestant neighbors, the Gallagher space, incorporates newer materials like OSB alongside vintage wallpaper, using anachronistic materials to tell a story about their class difference. The result is a space that holds multiple timelines at once: historical, material, and the present day, weaving the Irish Civil War with materials from contemporary life in order to collapse the distance between the past and the present. Finally, we have Salome, a site-specific production in Minnesota directed by Grant Sorensen that I did sets and costumes for. It took place in a converted industrial garage turned wedding venue, and from the beginning, the central idea was duality: mother and daughter, power and submission, surface and interior. Oscar Wilde wrote Salome at a moment when Freud's psychoanalysis was beginning to emerge in Europe, shocking the sexually repressed aristocrats of Victorian England. The play is saturated with the unconscious, desiring, repressing, projecting. One of the most persistent images in the text is the moon. Every character looks at it and sees something different, projecting their own anxieties and desires onto it. Salome's first line is about how beautiful it looks, silver like a coin, pure like a virgin. That image of the moon, silver, reflective, unstable, became the foundation of the design. The entire environment is built from silver and chrome surfaces, from silver plates to antique tarnished goblets sourced from local Goodwills, to round confetti littering the ground in clumps from a party we just missed. The setting is the decadent banquet of King Herod, and in setting it in our contemporary world, I was inspired in part by Fashion Week banquets, spaces of excess where consumption becomes an installation and spectacle unto itself. The audience was seated around the table in front of the half-eaten food, immersed and implicated in this decadent feast. These reflective materials turn the space into a hall of mirror of sorts, reinforcing the narcissism and self-obsession of the royal family. In contrast, Iakanon, the imprisoned prophet emerging from the actual winter cold through the space's garage door, is dirt and flesh and texture. The same is true of the servants and caterers who wear natural fibers like linen, letting us feel their groundedness in the real natural world. Salome herself exists somewhere in between. Her costume is a high neck gown covered in coin like paillettes, catching and scattering light. It's ambiguous whether she has been designed to match the environment by her parents, like a doll, or whether the environment has been designed around her and we're seeing it through her imagination. The royals enter from the reception area of the venue, having slipped out of the party to see what's happening. Mother and daughter are doubled, both visions in silver, but their silhouettes reflect their different ideas about their sexuality. Salome trying to guard herself from her father's gaze, while Herodias is vying for it. Salome and her father, her antagonist, are also linked, silver threads running through his black suit jacket like pinstripes, the thread of fate, silver like the moon, connecting them both. In this play, everyone wants what they deep down cannot have and should not want. Salome wants Iakanon. Herod wants his daughter. Herodias wants Herod's affection again. Salome's garment functions both as ornament and armor, but by the time of the Dance of the Seven Veils, that dynamic collapses. She sheds her armor and weaponizes her body in a Dionysian dance to get her demands, the head of Iakanon, an act that fulfills her desire but she knows will destroy her family and bring her world crumbling around her. The decadence of the feast, of the poetry, of the language, all collapse into Iaconon's head in a cheap plastic bag, sloshing with blood. She repeats the phrase, "Let me kiss your lips, let me kiss your lips," and when she does, the plastic prevents her from getting what she actually wants.